This is a special day. Something good inside this truck. Hello folks, welcome back. That yellow truck brought one of the coolest clocks that I will probably ever have a chance to work on. This is an E. Howard street clock. Here we see the mast, and we see the crown, and we see parts of the bezels. And I want to tell you the story of this clock, and then we're going to get started actually finishing the restoration on this clock and directing it. The history of this clock begins in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, where this clock was purchased by the Attleboro Savings and Loan as an advertising clock for the bank in the city. It was very exciting when I found two pictures of this clock, literally this clock in use in Attleboro, one from 1909 and one from perhaps maybe 10 or 15 years later. The history of this clock gets a little bit fuzzy after that. The clock was standing for a number of decades as the business operated in that location and then transferred to private ownership sometime after that. The story of this clock picks up in 2016 when it was sold at auction. At the time it was standing at a residence and someone in the Northeast bought it and decided to have it refurbished. That restoration is about 90% complete. All the metal work has been sandblasted and repainted. Some of the movement work has been done. But due to a change in plans, that owner decided that they were not actually going to set it up, so the clock became for sale again. I was able to make an offer on the clock, and the yellow truck has brought it here to the Midwest after about a 1,400-mile journey. And here it is. Let's talk through the pieces. Here is the bottom of the column, and this is where the movement will live. There is a seat board. You can see a hole right here where the seat board mounts. And this is the back of the clock. You can see some holes around here where this panel is bolted on. On the other side is where the access door is used for winding it with a lock. Then we have a one-piece neck that goes up to the capital here, and we have some screws that attach to this saddle, which is the next part. We have a very large cast iron ring, and then these two inside bezels that make up the structure of the top of the clock. And here is the crown. Here we have the main glass dial rings and the glass. This is 3/8 inch thick tempered glass that the restorer had fitted to this, which is great. Here are the doors. You can see the one on the left is the access door with hinges. Here is the beautifully restored brass lock. And this is the upper seat board where the motion work sits. And here we see a great piece of history of this clock, Attleboro Savings and Loan, Massachusetts. Unfortunately, the E. Howard records are incomplete, and I don't have an exact production date of this clock. However, the Attleboro Savings and Loan moved to a new building in 1903, and it seems very probable that that was when this clock was made. Moving inside the clock, here are the dials. These are absolutely massive. I'll put my hand here to give some sense of scale. We have some history of service in the clock. Here we have something from 1975, dismantled, cleaned, oiled. We have 1987, 87 and 98, 1985, 86. Here is our winding T-handle with the square drive here, and this is the door key. I love how E. Howard made this very custom. This is number Attle to indicate the Attleboro Savings and Loan. This is what's called a spalted dial, which means it's not just a flat finish. It actually looks like shingle granules that are stuck in here, and that's very cool. And this is metal. This is extremely heavy. This whole clock is very, very heavy. We have some of the fitments here. Those have all been repainted. Here's the opposite face. We have a weight pulley, and this is what's called the motion works. Now this is actually upside down as it sits right now. This part here goes down to the movement below, and you can see this causes the hands to operate in the appropriate way for each side of the clock. And we have the hour barrel and then the minute wheel here. So that's very cool. I want to draw your attention to the thickness of the brass, the niceness of the operation of this even after 120 years of running. We have some universal joint components here that these would connect the clock so that it could tolerate a little misalignment of the upper motion works and the movement. And here we have the hands. These are actually wooden, and there is a metal arbor on here in this case. This is a minute hand, so it's got the square arbor. And then it has a steel rod that acts as a counterbalance so that the clock doesn't have to operate harder pulling the hands uphill than it does downhill. That also helps with timekeeping. Here is the inner dial ring. This has been nicely re-stenciled. Those look really, really nice. Up here is the upper seat board. This is the pendulum bob. Again, for scale, here's my hand, just a little bit smaller than my hand. This weighs probably 15, 18 pounds, something like that. And we have our pendulum rod. This is the clearance for the winding arbor. And then here are the threads where our bob attaches. And here we have the movement. This is so cute. It is about maybe 20 inches tall. On the front here we have our suspension spring. Here's our pendulum crutch. Here is our big winding arbor again. And if we look inside the movement, we can see this is our cable drum. This will be 1/8 inch galvanized cable. And we have maintaining power again here. And then we have our gear reductions up to our escape wheel. Now I'm missing the pallets for this at the moment, so hopefully the seller can find those and send them my way. We can fabricate something, I'm sure, if we have to, but hopefully we don't have to do that. And here is how the power is transmitted up to the clock. We've got bevel gears that drive this mechanism right here. This is a bottom half of one of the universal joints that go up to the upper dial, and this is attached to the movement. You can see that without the pallets in, I'm actually driving the movement with this. But if you need to adjust the time on the clock, what you can do is you can pull this little pin, and that disengages essentially the dial from the motion works. And if you look underneath here, there are a bunch of holes where you can adjust this. So that's pretty neat. It's very easy to adjust the time on the clock. We can see right now it's set at 30 minutes. This is all original paint, which is really great. For a clock that's been outside for 120 years, the fact that it's in such great shape is just really speaks to the quality of the materials that Howard used 120 years ago, and the fact that if you take care of something, it can last a long time. There is a little bit of movement work that we need to do. If you look right here, this is pretty loose. We're going to need to put a bushing in there. And this is one of the mysteries of metalwork, where we have steel on brass. They tend to wear very well. You can see these big bushings here. There's a little slop in them, and I'll investigate this when I have the movement apart, but it's probably not too bad. But here we have steel on, in this case, cast iron, and you can see this has not fared quite as well. And so the bottom half of the train has this brass and steel arrangement, but as we get up the train, they omitted some of that brass. The escape wheel isn't quite as bad as this wheel here. But nonetheless, there's a little bit of wear. You can see on this pinion, there's a little bit of wear there. But this clock has been running for 120 years, and it's going to continue to run for another longer than I care about it. A few other features here. This is our fine rate adjustment knob. You can see that this raises and lowers our suspension spring, which changes the length of the pendulum. There is also a course adjustment on the bottom of the rod here. You stick the bob on, and then this nut can be adjusted for additional travel. But that is most of the clock. I'll show you the weight in a moment, and then we'll get to work building a structure to support this thing. Here is our weight. We've got a pulley inside the weight. This is lead. This weighs 100 pounds, something like that. But yeah, this completes the clock. So how are we going to get this thing in the ground? The base of this clock is about 21.5 inches square, and there are mounting bolts in the sides of each of these 4 legs. This needs concrete and a footing like you're building a house. In Minnesota here, our frost line requirement, at least in the southern half of the state, is 42 inches. I'm going to go a little deeper than that to 48 to the bottom of the hole, and we're going to build a metal structure and then pour concrete around it so that this clock has some ballast underground so that it's not going to shift with the frost or be tippy with wind. These holes are appropriate for 3/4 inch threaded rod, so we'll use that as our main anchoring point. And in order to make this fit, we're going to make a template off of these because these holes are not necessarily exactly machine tolerance. This whole thing is cast iron, and what that means is they literally cast it. They made a sand casting of a template and then they poured iron into it to form this shape. And that inherently is a moderately accurate process. The metal warps and changes, the sand moves a little bit. But the quality of this casting is really fantastic. If we look at the detail here, the bevels, this is just really a great piece of work. So wooden template will get us our hole positions to allow us to align the hole pattern here. We'll do some rebar and some wooden forms for the shape of the structure and then dig a hole.